The telegram arrived on a bitter February morning in 1885, bringing news that would change everything about the cattle ranch in Wyoming territory that Ambrose Sullivan had inherited 3 months earlier when his uncle died of pneumonia. Ambrose stood in the small telegraph office in Kelton, reading the words twice before the reality settled into his chest like a stone. His foreman had quit without notice, running off with a saloon girl to California. Spring roundup was 6 weeks away, and he had 1,000 head of cattle scattered across 20,000 acres of unforgiving rangeland. The snow was still waist-deep in places, and he had exactly 2 ranch hands left who knew anything about working livestock. One was 60 years old with arthritis, and the other was barely 19 and green as spring grass. He crumpled the telegram in his fist and walked out into the cold morning, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The main street of Kelton was mostly empty, just a few hardy souls moving between buildings with their collars turned up against the wind. Ambrose had been in town to pick up supplies, but now his mind raced with the problem at hand. He needed help, and he needed it fast. The general store was warm when he pushed through the door, the potbelly stove in the corner radiating heat. Martha Henderson looked up from behind the counter, her weathered face creasing into a sympathetic smile. She had known his uncle for 20 years and had been kind to Ambrose since he arrived from Pennsylvania to claim his unexpected inheritance. "You look like you got bad news," Martha said, setting aside the inventory she had been tallying. "Foreman quit, took off for California." Ambrose moved to the stove, warming his hands. "I do not suppose you know anyone looking for ranch work. I can pay fair wages, but it is going to be hard work through spring and summer." Martha was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming on the counter. "There is someone," she said slowly. "But you might not like it. At this point, I will take what I can get. Lila Remington. She is staying at the boarding house, came through about 3 weeks ago. Her father died last year, left her with nothing but debts. She sold everything she had back in Kansas and came west looking for work." Martha paused, measuring her words. "She grew up on a cattle ranch, knows horses, knows livestock. She can rope and ride better than most men I have seen." Ambrose felt his eyebrows rise. "You are suggesting I hire a woman to work my ranch. I am suggesting you hire someone who can do the job. Whether they wear trousers or a skirt should not matter much when you got cattle that need working." Martha's voice was firm. "She is desperate for work, Ambrose. She has been taking laundry and mending jobs, but it is not enough. Come spring, she will have to move on or marry one of those miners up in the hills, and I can tell you right now, that would be a waste of a capable person." He thought about it, turning the idea over in his mind. His uncle had been traditional in many ways, but he had also taught Ambrose that survival in Wyoming territory required flexibility and common sense. If this woman could actually do the work, did it matter that she was female? He had worked alongside women in the steel mills back in Pennsylvania. They had not done the same jobs as the men, but they had worked hard and earned their pay honestly. "Where can I find her?" he asked. "Boarding house, room 3. But Ambrose, be respectful. She is not some saloon girl. She is a decent woman who has had a hard run of luck." He nodded and headed back out into the cold. The boarding house was 2 streets over, a neat 2-story building painted white with green shutters. Mrs. Cooper, who ran the place, answered his knock and directed him upstairs after he explained his business. When he knocked on the door, marked with a brass number 3, a voice called for him to wait a moment. He heard movement inside, and then the door opened to reveal a woman who looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and gray eyes that assessed him with a directness he found surprising. She was pretty, he noticed, though she looked tired and there were lines of worry around her mouth. She wore a simple brown dress that had been mended in several places, and her hands showed the roughness of recent hard work. "Miss Remington, my name is Ambrose Sullivan. Martha Henderson at the general store said you might be interested in ranch work." Something flickered in those gray eyes, hope mixed with caution. "Come in, please. It is cold in the hallway." The room was small and sparse, containing just a bed, a dresser, and a single chair by the window. She gestured for him to take the chair while she sat on the edge of the bed, her posture straight and alert. "Martha said you grew up on a cattle ranch in Kansas," Ambrose began. "That is right. My father ran 2,000 head before the drought hit in '82. We lost half the herd that year, and the bank took the rest when he could not make the loan payments. He died last spring. Heart gave out." Lila's voice was steady, but he could hear the grief underneath. "I sold what was left and came west. Thought I might find work on a ranch, but most owners will not even talk to me once they find out I am a woman. Can you really ride and rope? I can. I can also brand, doctor sick cattle, deliver calves, fix fence, break horses to saddle, and keep books if you need that too. I grew up doing all of it alongside my father in our hands. I'm not as strong as a full-grown man, but I am strong enough, and I am smarter than most when it comes to handling livestock." There was no boastfulness in her tone, just a simple statement of fact. Ambrose found himself believing her. "I need help through the season, spring into fall. Roundup starts in 6 weeks. I've got 1,000 head scattered across 20,000 acres, and I just lost my foreman. I can pay $30 a month plus room and board. The work will be hard and the days will be long. If you cannot keep up, I will have to let you go, but I will pay you for whatever time you worked." $30 a month. Lila's eyes widened slightly. "That is fair wages for a foreman. If you can do the work of a foreman, you should get paid like one. I do not believe in cheating people." He paused. "But I need to know you can actually do what you say. Will you come out to the ranch tomorrow? I will have you work with the horses, show me what you can do. If it is all talk, we will part ways with no hard feelings. If you are as good as you claim, the job is yours." Lila stood, offering her hand. "I will be there at sunrise. Where is the ranch?" 10 miles north of town, along Bitter Creek. "The ranch house sits in a valley with cottonwoods. You cannot miss it." He shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "Fair warning, Miss Remington. I have got 2 hands left. One is old enough to be your grandfather, and the other is young and might say stupid things. I will not tolerate any disrespect, but ranch life is not always polite. I grew up with ranch hands, Mr. Sullivan. I can handle rough language and rough men as long as they keep their hands to themselves. They will, or they will be looking for work elsewhere." He left the boarding house feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He had come to town needing a solution to an impossible problem, and he might have found one, though it was not the solution he had expected. Time would tell if Lila Remington was as capable as she claimed. That night at the ranch, he told his 2 remaining hands about the new hire. Old Pete Reynolds took the news with a shrug, but Danny Carter, the young hand, looked skeptical. "A woman," Danny said. "Boss, she is going to slow us down. We cannot be stopping to help her with everything." "If she cannot keep up, she will not stay," Ambrose said firmly. "But if she can do the work, I expect you both to treat her with respect. We need the help, and I am not in a position to be choosy." Pete spoke up, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "I worked with a woman rancher up in Montana once, toughest person I ever met, man or woman. If this girl really knows cattle, I do not care if she wears a dress." Ambrose went to bed that night wondering if he was making a huge mistake. His uncle had left him a working ranch, but Ambrose had only been ranching for 3 months. Back in Pennsylvania, he had worked in steel mills and warehouses. He knew hard work, but cattle ranching was a different world entirely. He had been relying heavily on his foreman to teach him the details, and now that man was gone. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Ambrose was in the barn checking on the horses when he heard hoofbeats in the yard. He walked out to see Lila Remington riding up on a sturdy-looking bay mare. She sat the saddle like she had been born there, her posture relaxed and natural. She wore trousers and a heavy coat, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the glare of sun on snow. "Morning," she called, dismounting in one smooth motion. "I hope you do not mind the trousers. I cannot work cattle in a dress. Makes sense to me." He gestured toward the corral where several horses milled about. "I've got a 3-year-old gelding that needs breaking to saddle. He has been started but not finished. If you can get a saddle on him and ride him without getting thrown, I will believe you know what you are doing." Lila studied the horses, her eyes picking out the gelding in question. He was a handsome sorrel with a white blaze, about 15 hands tall and full of nervous energy. "That one there, that is the one." She climbed over the fence and spent several minutes just standing in the corral, letting the horses settle and get used to her presence. Ambrose watched as she slowly approached the gelding, talking to him in a low voice. The horse tossed his head and moved away, but she did not chase him. Instead, she positioned herself so that he had to keep moving, circling the corral at a trot. After a few minutes, the gelding stopped and turned to face her. She waited, still talking in that low voice, and then the horse took a step toward her. She rewarded him by turning away, releasing the pressure. It was a dance Ambrose recognized from watching his uncle work horses, though he could not do it himself yet. 20 minutes later, Lila had a rope on the gelding and was rubbing him all over with a blanket, getting him used to things touching his body. The horse was nervous but not panicked, his attention focused on her. Pete had come out of the bunkhouse to watch, and Danny stood by the barn door. Both men were silent as Lila saddled the gelding with smooth, efficient movements. The horse danced and snorted, but she kept him moving in circles, not giving him time to think about bucking. When she finally stepped into the saddle, the gelding humped his back and Crow hopped a few times, but Lila sat deep and relaxed, her hands light on the reins. She urged him forward into a trot, then a canter, circling the corral in both directions. After 10 minutes of riding, she dismounted and unsaddled the horse, rubbing him down and praising him with gentle words. "Well," Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the snow, "she knows what she is doing." Danny said nothing, but Ambrose saw grudging respect in the young man's eyes. Lila led the gelding to the fence and climbed over. Her cheeks were flushed from cold and exertion, and there was satisfaction in her expression. "He is going to be a good horse once he settles down. Someone started him right." "That was my uncle's work before he died," Ambrose said. "You are hired, Miss Remington. Can you start today?" "I will need to get my things from the boarding house, but yes, I can start today. Pete will show you to the spare room in the ranch house. It is small, but it has a good stove and a solid door that locks. You will take your meals with us in the main house." He paused. "I am not sure how my uncle would feel about a woman working the ranch, but he taught me to judge people by what they can do, not what they look like. You show up, do the work, and you will be treated fair." "That is all I ask," Lila said. She rode back to town and returned before noon with her belongings packed in 2 saddle bags. The spare room was indeed small, just off the kitchen in what had once been a pantry that Ambrose's uncle had converted for storage. It had a narrow bed, a dresser, a small stove, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Lila unpacked quickly and joined the men for a lunch of stew and biscuits. The conversation was awkward at first, but Pete broke the ice with stories about Montana, and soon they were discussing the ranch and the upcoming roundup. Lila asked intelligent questions about the range, where the cattle tended to congregate, and what kind of calving losses they had experienced over the winter. "We will not know until we do the roundup," Ambrose admitted. "My uncle did not keep as close track as he should have in his last year. He was sick more than he let on." "Then we will need to plan for the worst and hope for the best," Lila said. "I would suggest we start riding the range as soon as the snow pulls back enough. Get a sense of where the cattle are and what kind of shape they are in. The earlier we start, the better prepared we will be when roundup comes." Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. As March arrived and the snow began to melt in earnest, they rode out every day to scout the range. The work was cold and exhausting, spending long hours in the saddle searching for cattle in the breaks and coulees where they sheltered from the wind. Ambrose found himself riding alongside Lila more often than not, while Pete and Danny worked together. At first it was simply practical, the pairing that made sense. But as the days passed, he began to appreciate her company for more than just her knowledge of cattle. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, and she did not complain even when the work was miserable. One afternoon, they found a cow stuck in mud at the edge of a half-frozen creek, bawling piteously while her calf stood nearby. It took both of them working together with ropes to pull her out, and they ended up soaked with icy water and covered in mud. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, both of them shivering and exhausted, Lila started laughing. "What is funny?" Ambrose asked through chattering teeth. "I was just thinking, back in Kansas, my father used to say ranching was 90% misery and 10% moments that made it all worthwhile. I think he might have been optimistic about that 10%. Ambrose found himself laughing too, and suddenly the cold did not seem quite so bad. They made it back to the ranch after dark, and Lila headed straight to her room to change into dry clothes while Ambrose did the same. When they gathered for dinner, Pete had made a pot of venison stew and the kitchen was warm and steamy. They ate in companionable silence, too tired for much conversation. As March turned into April, the snow continued to melt and the work intensified. They found cattle scattered far and wide, some in good shape and others thin from the hard winter. They doctored sick animals, helped deliver difficult births, and pulled several more cows out of mud and bog holes. Ambrose noticed that Lila never asked for special treatment and never backed down from hard or dangerous work. She earned the respect of both Pete and Danny through simple competence and determination. Even Danny, who had been skeptical at first, began to defer to her judgment on matters of livestock handling. But Ambrose also noticed other things. The way Lila looked in the early morning light when the sun caught the auburn in her hair. The sound of her laugh when Pete told one of his terrible jokes. The capable way she moved, every gesture efficient and purposeful. He found himself watching her more than was probably appropriate, and he caught himself thinking about her when he should have been focused on work. He told himself it was just because she was the only woman on the ranch that any man would notice. But he knew it was more than that. There was something about Lila Remington that drew him, something beyond her competence with horses and cattle. One evening in mid-April, after a particularly long day, Ambrose was sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was finally warm, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. He heard the door open and close, and then Lila was sitting in the other chair, her own gaze on the mountains. "Beautiful country," she said quietly. "Different from Kansas, but beautiful. Do you miss it, Kansas?" "I miss my father. I miss having a place that was mine. But the land itself, no, too many bad memories there at the end. She was quiet for a moment. This feels right somehow, like I was supposed to end up here. I am glad you did, Ambrose said, and he meant it more deeply than she could know. I would have been in real trouble without you. I am still learning all this, and having someone who actually knows what they are doing has made all the difference. Lila turned to look at him, her gray eyes serious. You are learning fast. Your uncle would be proud of how you have stepped up. I hope so. I never expected to be a rancher. Back in Pennsylvania, I thought I would work in the mills my whole life, maybe become a foreman eventually. When the letter came saying I had inherited this place, it was like my whole life turned upside down. Do you like it? Ranching, I mean. Ambrose thought about that. It is hard. Harder than mill work in a lot of ways, but yes, I like it. I like being outside, working with the animals. I like the independence of it, being my own boss. And I like this. He gestured at the mountains, the vast sky, the endless space. There is room to breathe out here. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Ambrose wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that the best part of ranching was getting to see her every day, but he held his tongue. She was his employee, and she depended on this job. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable or put her in an awkward position. Roundup started the first week of May. They hired on 3 additional hands for the season, men Pete knew from previous years. With 6 people working, they began the systematic process of gathering the cattle from across the range, bringing them in to be counted, branded, and sorted. The work was brutal, starting before dawn and often lasting until after dark. They ate in the saddle more often than not, and everyone was saddle sore and exhausted. But there was also an energy to it, a sense of purpose and accomplishment as the cattle herd grew day by day in the big pasture near the ranch buildings. Lila worked as hard as any of the men, and Ambrose noticed that the seasonal hands quickly learned to respect her. She had a gift for reading cattle, for knowing which way they would move, and how to position herself to guide them without causing a stampede. She could rope as well as anyone, and she never missed when she threw her loop. One afternoon, one of the seasonal hands, a cocky youngster named Jim who clearly thought highly of his own abilities, made the mistake of suggesting that Lila should stay at the ranch and cook instead of working the roundup. Before Ambrose could say anything, Lila fixed Jim with a level stare and said, "How about this? We will have a roping contest at dinner tonight. If you can beat me, I will cook for the rest of roundup. If I beat you, you can cook while I work cattle." Jim laughed, thinking she was joking, but Pete and Danny knew better. They set up the contest that evening, using a log with horns attached as the target. Each person got 5 throws. Jim went first and landed 3 out of 5, which was respectable. He looked confident as Lila stepped up with her rope. She took her time, building her loop with practiced hands. Then she threw and the loop settled around the horns perfectly. She did it again and again. 5 throws, 5 perfect catches. Jim's face went red, but to his credit, he held up his end of the bargain. He cooked for the next 3 nights, and after that, no one questioned Lila's abilities. Ambrose found himself feeling an unexpected pride in her, and something else too, something deeper and more complicated. He was falling for her, he realized. It had happened gradually over the past 2 months, built from 1,000 small moments of working alongside her, laughing with her, watching her face when she thought no one was looking. But he did not know how she felt, or if she felt anything at all beyond professional respect. He was her employer, which complicated everything. And there was the fact that he had only hired her for the season. Come fall, when the work slowed down, she would presumably move on to find other employment. The thought of her leaving made his chest tight with an emotion he did not want to examine too closely. Roundup stretched into June, and they tallied the cattle as they came in. They had lost fewer than expected over the winter, and the calf crop was good. Ambrose felt relief washing over him as he realized the ranch would be profitable this year. He could pay his hands, stock up for winter, and have enough left over to make some needed improvements. One evening, after a particularly successful day of gathering, Pete pulled out a harmonica and started playing. They were all sitting around the fire near the bunkhouse, too tired to go to bed but too energized from the work to settle down. One of the seasonal hands had a guitar, and soon they had music going. Someone started singing and others joined in. Lila sat across the fire from Ambrose, her face golden in the firelight. She was singing along, her voice clear and true, and he could not stop looking at her. When she noticed him watching, she smiled, and he felt that smile all the way through his body. Later, as the fire died down and the hands drifted off to the bunkhouse, Ambrose found himself alone with Lila. She was banking the fire, making sure no sparks would escape to start a grass fire. "Lila," he said, and she looked up at him. "I want to talk to you about something, all right?" He took a breath, trying to find the right words. "When I hired you, I said it was for the season, through fall, but I have been thinking the ranch needs a foreman year-round. Someone who knows cattle and horses, someone who can manage the hands and keep things running smooth. I would like that person to be you if you are interested. The pay would be $40 a month through the winter, $50 during working season. You would have full authority to make decisions about the livestock and the running of the ranch." Lila stared at him, her eyes wide. "You are offering me a permanent position, as foreman." "I am. You have more than proved yourself. You are the best hand I have, and you are a natural leader. Pete and Danny respect you, and the seasonal hands learn to respect you quick enough." He paused. "Unless you have other plans, I would understand if you want to move on." "Other plans?" Lila's voice was soft. "Ambrose, I have been dreading the end of the season because it would mean leaving here. Leaving the ranch, leaving." She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Leaving what?" His heart was pounding. She raised her eyes to meet his, and in the dying firelight he could see vulnerability there and something that might have been hope. "Leaving you." The words hung in the air between them. Ambrose crossed the space between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his. They were rough and calloused from months of hard work, and to him they were beautiful. "I have been trying not to fall for you," he said quietly. "You work for me, and I did not want to make things complicated or put you in an uncomfortable position. But Lila, I have failed completely at not falling for you. I think about you all the time. You are the first thing I want to see in the morning and the last thing I want to see at night." "Ambrose," she whispered. And then she was in his arms and he was kissing her, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "This is probably breaking some kind of rule," Lila said with a shaky laugh. "The boss falling for the help." "Then you are fired," Ambrose said, "because I care more about you than I do about any rule. You cannot fire me. I am too valuable to the ranch." "Then I will just have to marry you instead." He said it without thinking, but as soon as the words were out, he knew they were right. Lila's eyes widened and he hurried to explain. "I know that is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But Lila, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to build a life with you. I want this ranch to be ours together. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my days and work alongside you and build something that lasts." Tears were streaming down Lila's face, catching the starlight. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ambrose, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally returned to the ranch house, they were holding hands. Pete was sitting on the porch smoking his pipe, and when he saw them together, he smiled. "About time," was all he said. The next morning, Ambrose announced their engagement to the hands. Danny whooped and congratulated them, while the seasonal workers offered their best wishes. There was genuine happiness in their responses, which told Ambrose that he and Lila had not been as subtle as they thought about their growing feelings. They decided to get married quickly. There was no point in waiting, and both of them wanted to start their life together as soon as possible. The closest town with a proper church was Rock Springs, about 30 miles east. They made plans to ride there the following Saturday. The week before the wedding passed in a blur. Roundup was winding down, and they had most of the cattle gathered and branded. Lila rode into Kelton one day with Pete to buy fabric for a wedding dress. She had protested that she did not need anything fancy, but Pete had insisted that every bride deserved a proper dress, and he gave her money from his own wages to make sure she had enough for good fabric. Martha Henderson helped with the sewing, and Mrs. Cooper from the boarding house insisted on making a wedding cake. The small community of Kelton had embraced Lila over her months there, and they were all excited about the wedding. On the Friday before the ceremony, Ambrose's nerves finally caught up with him. He was sitting in the ranch house office, supposedly working on the account books, but actually just staring at the pages without seeing them. Pete knocked on the door frame and leaned against it, studying him. "You are not getting cold feet, are you?" Pete asked. "No. God, no. I just keep thinking, what if I am not enough? What if I cannot make her happy?" Pete snorted. "Boy, that woman looks at you like you hung the moon. She does not need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be you. Keep treating her with respect. Keep working alongside her like you have been, and you will do just fine. What if the ranch fails? What if I lose everything like her father did? Then you will lose it together, and you will figure out what comes next together. That is what marriage is. It is not about having everything perfect. It is about facing whatever comes side by side." Pete pushed off from the door frame. "Your uncle used to say that the West is not kind to people who go it alone, but it rewards those who find someone to stand with them. You found someone good, Ambrose. Do not let fear talk you out of it." The words settled something in Ambrose's chest. Pete was right. He and Lila were stronger together than they were apart. Whatever challenges came, they would face them as partners. Saturday dawned clear and warm. They set out for Rock Springs in the early morning, Ambrose and Lila riding together, while Pete, Danny, and two of the seasonal hands followed with a wagon loaded with supplies for a celebration. Martha Henderson and Mrs. Cooper rode in the wagon too, having insisted on witnessing the ceremony. The church in Rock Springs was a simple white building with a tall steeple. The minister was a kind-faced man named Reverend Thomas, who seemed delighted to perform a wedding on such short notice. He asked them a few questions to make sure they were both of age and willing participants, and then he invited everyone into the sanctuary. Lila had changed into her wedding dress in the back room of the church. When she walked down the aisle toward Ambrose, he felt his breath catch. The dress was simple, made of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders for once, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Martha had picked that morning. But it was not the dress or the flowers that made her beautiful. It was the joy in her face, the love in her eyes as she looked at him. She was choosing him, this woman who was strong and capable and could have gone anywhere, done anything. She was choosing to build a life with him, and he felt humbled by the gift of it. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words binding them together as husband and wife. When Reverend Thomas told Ambrose he could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, aware of their small audience but not really caring. Lila was his wife, and the rightness of it filled him with a happiness so complete, it was almost painful. They celebrated with a meal at the hotel in Rock Springs, and then they loaded up the wagon and headed back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting and Ambrose's new wife was drowsing against his shoulder. The seasonal hands discreetly made themselves scarce, heading to the bunkhouse and giving the newlyweds privacy. Pete helped unload the wagon and then followed them, tipping his hat to Lila and giving Ambrose a knowing wink. Alone finally, Ambrose and Lila stood in the ranch house kitchen, suddenly shy with each other despite the fact that they had been working side by side for months. "I moved my things to your room," Lila said quietly. "I hope that is all right. I know the room I was in is small, but maybe we could use it for storage or something." "That is more than all right. I want you in my room, in our room." He took her hands. "Lila, I know we did this fast. If you need time, if you want to take things slow." She kissed him, stopping his words. "I do not want to take things slow. I want to start our life together right now, tonight." He swept her up in his arms, making her laugh with surprise, and carried her to the bedroom. The door closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The days that followed their wedding were some of the happiest of Ambrose's life. He woke up each morning with Lila beside him, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. They worked together during the day, managing the ranch and finishing up the last of the roundup work. At night, they returned to the ranch house to eat dinner together and spend the evening talking about their plans for the future. The seasonal hands finished up their work in late June and headed out to find employment elsewhere. That left just Ambrose, Lila, Pete, and Danny to manage the ranch through the summer. It was enough, especially now that Lila was fully in charge as foreman and could make decisions without consulting Ambrose on every detail. The cattle were moved to summer pasture in the high country, where the grass was lush and green. They spent long days riding the range, checking on the herd and making sure predators did not take too many calves. It was hard work, but it was satisfying work, and Ambrose loved doing it alongside his wife. In July, they discovered that one of the cows had twins, a rare occurrence that had both of them excited. They brought the cow and her calves down to a pasture closer to the ranch house where they could keep an eye on her and make sure she was able to feed both babies. "My father always said twins were lucky," Lila said as they watched the calves nursing. "It is a sign of fertility in the land and in the herd. I hope he is right. We could use all the luck we can get." Ambrose put his arm around her shoulders. "Though I feel like I already got my share of luck the day you walked into that hotel room in Kelton." She leaned into him. "I was so nervous that day. I had been turned away by 3 ranchers already, and I thought you would do the same thing. When you actually listened to me, actually gave me a chance, I could hardly believe it. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best. Marrying you was the first." She laughed and kissed his cheek. Smooth talker. As summer deepened, they settled into the rhythms of ranch life. There was always work to be done, from fixing fence to cutting hay to preparing for the eventual fall roundup, when they would bring the cattle back down from the high country. But there was also time for quiet moments, for sitting on the porch in the evening and watching the sun set, for riding out together to a favorite spot by the creek where they could be alone. In August, Lila started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when it continued for a week, she began to suspect the truth. She rode into Kelton to see the doctor, taking Martha Henderson with her for moral support. Dr. Wilson examined her and confirmed what she already suspected. She was pregnant, about 2 months along if his estimate was correct. The baby would come in March, just about a year after she had first come to Wyoming territory. Lila rode back to the ranch with her hand pressed against her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. She was nervous, certainly, remembering friends who had died in childbirth or who had lost babies in the first year of life. But she was also excited. She had always wanted children, and the thought of having a baby with Ambrose filled her with joy. She told him that evening as they were getting ready for bed. He had been talking about the plans for fall roundup, and she waited until he paused for breath. "Ambrose, I have some news," she said, and something in her voice made him turn to look at her intently. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine, better than fine." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am pregnant. The baby will come in March." For a moment he just stared at her, processing the information. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it made her heart squeeze. "A baby. We are going to have a baby, we are." He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and protest that he would make her dizzy. He set her down carefully, his hands gentle on her arms. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. Lila, this is wonderful. You are not worried about the ranch, about having another mouth to feed." "Worried? No. Scared out of my mind, maybe a little. But Lila, this is what I want. A family with you, children growing up on this land, building something that will last beyond us." He cupped her face in his hands. "We are going to be good parents, and our child is going to be so loved." They held each other for a long time, both of them thinking about the future that was unfolding before them. A child, the first of their family. It made everything they were working for feel even more important. Over the next few weeks, they told Pete and Danny the news. Both men were delighted, and Pete immediately started planning modifications to the ranch house to add a nursery. Danny, who had developed a younger brother's affection for Lila, became protective and insisted on taking on any task he deemed too strenuous for a pregnant woman, which made Lila both amused and exasperated. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when Danny tried to stop her from climbing up to fix a gate hinge. "Yes, but you are carrying the next generation of the ranch," Danny said stubbornly. "Let me do the climbing." Ambrose, watching the exchange, grinned. It was good to know that Lila would have people looking out for her, even if she was too independent to always appreciate it. Fall came to Wyoming in a blaze of golden aspens and cold, crisp mornings. They brought the cattle down from the high country for fall roundup. Counting and sorting and selling off the steers they did not plan to keep over winter. It was another successful year, and Ambrose was able to put away a healthy amount in the bank. As the days grew shorter and colder, they prepared the ranch for winter. Wood was cut and stacked, supplies were laid in, and the cattle were moved to the winter pastures where they would have access to water and some protection from the worst of the weather. Lila's pregnancy was beginning to show now, a small swell under her shirt that Ambrose loved to rest his hand on when they were alone. She was still working, though she had scaled back to lighter tasks as winter approached. She spent more time in the ranch house doing paperwork and managing supplies, leaving the outside work to the men. The first snow came in late November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. More storms followed through December, and by Christmas, the ranch was blanketed in white. They celebrated the holiday quietly, just the four of them, with a roasted chicken and pie made from dried apples. Pete played his harmonica while they sang carols, and Ambrose gave Lila a music box he had ordered from a catalog, with a tiny dancer that spun when the lid was opened. She cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I have never had anything so fine." "You deserve beautiful things," Ambrose said, kissing her forehead. "You deserve everything good in this world." As the new year of 1886 began, Lila's pregnancy advanced. She was getting bigger now, her movements slower and more careful. Dr. Wilson had agreed to come to the ranch when her time came, but they had also arranged for Martha Henderson to be there, as she had experience with birthing babies. January passed in a blur of cold and snow. February brought more storms, and Ambrose found himself getting anxious as Lila's due date approached. What if something went wrong? What if the doctor could not make it through the snow? What if he lost her, the way men sometimes lost their wives in childbirth? Lila seemed to sense his fear. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, her knitting in her lap and her belly so large she could barely see her hands, she reached over and took his hand. "Stop worrying," she said gently. "I am strong and the baby is strong. We are going to be fine. You do not know that. Things can happen. Things can always happen. I could get thrown from a horse tomorrow. You could get struck by lightning. We cannot live our lives in fear of what might go wrong, Ambrose. We just have to have faith that we will handle whatever comes." He knew she was right, but that did not stop the worry that gnawed at him as March approached. The baby came on a cold morning in early March, with snow falling softly outside the windows. Lila woke him before dawn, her face tight with pain. "It is time," she said. The next 12 hours were the longest of Ambrose's life. Martha arrived within an hour, having stayed at the ranch for the past week in anticipation. Dr. Wilson made it through the snow by mid-morning. They sent Ambrose out of the bedroom, and he paced the kitchen while Pete and Danny tried to distract him with talk of the ranch and the coming spring. He could hear Lila crying out in pain, and each sound was like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, but Martha had firmly told him that he would just be in the way. So he waited, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in, making bargains and promises if only Lila and the baby would be all right. Finally, late in the afternoon, he heard a new sound. A baby crying, thin and strong. He was on his feet instantly, heading for the bedroom. "Doctor." Wilson met him at the door, his face tired but smiling. "You have a son," the doctor said. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." Ambrose pushed past him into the room. Lila was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but glowing with happiness. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the smallest person Ambrose had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Lila said softly. He crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby. The child had a wisp of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His eyes were closed, but his mouth was working, and one tiny fist had escaped the blanket. Ambrose reached out with one finger and touched that fist, and instantly the baby's hand clenched around his finger with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Ambrose whispered. "Lila, he is perfect." "He looks like you," Lila said. "He has your chin. Poor kid." Ambrose sat carefully on the edge of the bed, unable to look away from his son. What should we name him? They had talked about names over the winter, but had not settled on anything definite. Now Lila said, "I was thinking Arthur." "Arthur Sullivan. It is strong and it sounds good." "Arthur," Ambrose repeated. "I like it. Arthur Sullivan." He looked at his wife, this strong, brave woman who had just given him the greatest gift imaginable. Thank you for him, and thank you for being all right. I was so scared." "I told you we would be fine," Lila said, though her voice was tired. "We Remington women are tough. Well, Sullivan women now." He leaned over and kissed her gently, mindful of their precious burden. "Get some rest. I will take care of everything else." Over the next few weeks, they settled into the chaos of life with a newborn. Arthur was a good baby, though he woke frequently to nurse and seemed to have his days and nights confused for a while. Ambrose helped as much as he could, changing diapers and walking with Arthur when he was fussy, letting Lila sleep when she needed to. Pete and Danny were both smitten with the baby, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to try to get him to smile. The ranch work slowed down through the winter anyway, so they had time to adjust to the new family member. As March turned to April and the snow began to melt again, Ambrose stood on the porch one morning with Arthur in his arms. The baby was awake, his dark blue eyes seemingly focused on his father's face. Lila came out to join them, slipping her arm through Ambrose's free arm and leaning her head on his shoulder. "The snow is almost gone," she observed. "Another spring. Another season starting." "I was just thinking, a year ago I was desperate and worried about the ranch. I had just lost my foreman and I did not know how I was going to manage. And then you showed up. You took a chance on me. A lot of men would not have. Best chance I ever took." He kissed the top of her head. "In less than a year I hired you, fell in love with you, married you, and became a father. My whole life changed. Mine too. A year ago I was taking in laundry and wondering if I would have to leave Wyoming. Now I have a home, a family, a purpose. Everything I wanted and more than I knew to hope for." Arthur made a small sound and they both looked down at him. His eyes were starting to close, lulled by the warmth and the gentle sway of his father's arms. "You think we will tell him someday?" Lila asked. "About how we met? About how his father hired his mother to work cattle and then married her before the snow even melted?" Ambrose chuckled. "We will tell him. And I hope he understands what a special person his mother is. How she saved the ranch and saved me, all at the same time." "You saved me too," Lila said quietly. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You saw me for who I was, not just as a woman who should know her place. You made me your partner in every way." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the valley. Around them, the ranch was coming to life for another season. The cattle were starting to move to the greening pastures. Birds were returning from the south, filling the air with song. The creek was running high with snowmelt, and the first wildflowers were pushing up through the damp earth. It was the start of another cycle, another year of hard work and challenges and rewards. But this time, Ambrose faced it with a full heart. He had his wife, his son, his ranch. He had found his place in this wild, beautiful country, and he had found it with a woman who was as tough and resilient as the land itself. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from 1,000 head to 1,500. They weathered droughts and hard winters, dealt with predators and market fluctuations, but they did it together, always as partners. Arthur grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved horses and followed his parents around the ranch as soon as he was old enough to toddle. When he was 3, Lila gave birth to a daughter they named Alina, a sweet-tempered child with her mother's gray eyes and auburn hair. 2 years later came another son, James, who had his father's dark hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Pete stayed on as the senior ranch hand, becoming a beloved uncle figure to the children. Danny eventually married a girl from Kelton and built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, raising his own family while continuing to work for the Sullivans. The ranch house was expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family. They added on a larger kitchen, a proper parlor, and more bedrooms upstairs. Lila kept the small room off the kitchen, though, the one that had been her first room at the ranch. She used it as an office where she kept the ranch accounts and did the paperwork that kept everything running smoothly. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Ambrose would find her in that little room, sitting at the desk with the lamp burning low. He would come up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, and she would lean back against him with a contented sigh. "Remembering," he would ask. "Always," she would say. "Remembering how scared I was that first day, how much I needed this job. How I never imagined it would turn into all of this. You have any regrets? Tying yourself to a rancher who barely knew what he was doing, she would turn in her chair and pull him down for a kiss. Not a single one. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. As the children grew older, they took on more responsibilities around the ranch. Arthur proved to have a natural way with horses, just like his mother. Eleanor loved the cattle and spent hours watching them, learning their individual personalities and quirks. James, the youngest, was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, giving his parents gray hairs before his time. The ranch became known throughout Wyoming territory as one of the best managed operations, with high-quality cattle and horses that commanded top prices. But it was also known for something else, for the unusual partnership at its head. People talked about Lila Sullivan, the woman rancher who could outride and outrope most men. They talked about how she and her husband ran the ranch as equals, how their respect for each other was evident in everything they did. Some of the old-timers disapproved, thinking a woman should know her place. But most people recognized something special when they saw it. The Sullivans had built something strong and lasting, a partnership forged in hard work and mutual respect, deepened by love. In 1895, when Arthur turned 9, Wyoming officially became a state. The Sullivan family rode into Kelton for the celebration, joining with the whole town to mark the occasion. There were speeches and fireworks and dancing in the street. Ambrose and Lila danced together under the stars while their children played with the other youngsters. "Statehood," Ambrose said as they swayed to the music. "We are part of history now." "We have been part of history all along," Lila said. "Building lives out here, raising children, making the land productive. That is what made statehood possible." He pulled her closer. "Have I told you lately that I love you? Not in the last hour or so." "Well, I do. More than I can ever properly say. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. I cannot imagine any of this without you." "Good thing you do not have to," she said, resting her head against his chest. "I am not going anywhere." They danced until the music stopped and the bonfire burned down to embers. Then they gathered up their sleepy children and headed home to the ranch, to the house they had built together, to the life they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. As they rode through the darkness, the stars bright overhead, Ambrose thought back to that February morning 10 years earlier when he had received the telegram about his foreman quitting. He had been so worried, so uncertain about the future. If someone had told him then that his salvation would come in the form of an auburn-haired woman with gray eyes and a firm handshake, he never would have believed it. But life had a way of surprising you, of bringing you exactly what you needed when you needed it most. He had hired Lila for a season, thinking only about getting through the spring roundup. He had married her before the snow even melted, unable to imagine his future without her in it. And in doing so, he had found not just a wife, but a true partner in every sense of the word. The ranch continued to thrive as the children grew. Arthur, at 18, was already managing much of the day-to-day operations, his judgment sound and his work ethic strong. Eleanor, at 15, had developed a talent for horse breeding, carefully selecting bloodlines to improve the ranch's remuda. Even young James, despite his wild streak, was growing into a capable hand who could be trusted with real responsibility. Ambrose and Lila, now in their 40s, finally had time to slow down a bit. They still worked every day, still kept a close eye on the ranch operations, but they could also take time for themselves in a way they had not been able to when the children were small. On a spring morning in 1900, they rode out together to the high pasture where they had spent so much time in those early years. The grass was green and lush, dotted with wildflowers, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. They dismounted at their favorite spot by the creek and sat together on the bank, watching the water tumble over the rocks. 15 years, Lila said softly. 15 years since we got married. Feels like yesterday, feels like forever. Ambrose took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. I meant what I said that night by the fire, you know, about wanting to build a life with you. I just did not know how good that life would be. We have been lucky. Blessed, really. Good land, healthy children, each other. Not everyone gets that. No, they do not. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Lila, I want to do something. I have been thinking about this for a while. You know the old Peterson place, the small ranch on the south border, the one that has been abandoned for 3 years. Since Peterson died and his kids moved back east, that is the one. It is only 500 acres, but it adjoins our property. I want to buy it and I want to deed it to you. Not to us, to you specifically. In your name alone. He held up a hand when she started to protest. I know we are partners. I know everything we have built is ours together. But the law does not always see it that way. If something happened to me, if I died, there could be complications with inheritance, with creditors, with 1,000 things. I want you to have land that is absolutely yours, that no one can ever take from you. Lila's eyes were wet with tears. Ambrose, you do not have to do that. I know I do not have to. I want to. You came to Wyoming with nothing, Lila. Your father's ranch was taken by the bank. I do not ever want you to be in that position again. I want you to have security, to know that you will always have land that belongs to you. She was crying openly now, and he pulled her into his arms. You gave me everything, he said against her hair. You saved my ranch, gave me children, built a life with me. Let me give you this. Let me give you the security you deserve. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for making me your true partner in all things. They completed the purchase the following month, and the deed was recorded in Lila Sullivan's name alone. It was unusual enough that the county clerk remarked on it, but Ambrose just smiled and said his wife had earned it. The years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Arthur married a local girl and brought her to live on the ranch, starting his own family in a house they built near the main ranch house. Alina surprised everyone by going to normal school in Laramie, coming back with a teaching certificate, and starting a school for the ranch children in the area. She eventually married a veterinarian who set up practice in Kelton, but she kept her hand in the ranch operations, her expertise with horses still valuable. James, true to his nature, went off to seek adventure, working on ranches throughout the West before eventually settling in Montana with a wife he met while working on a horse ranch there. He came home to visit regularly, always with wild stories that made his parents shake their heads, and his nieces and nephews listen with wide eyes. As Ambrose and Lila grew older, their hair turning gray and their faces creasing with the lines of a life well lived, they spent more time on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. They had grandchildren now, a whole passel of them, running around the ranch and learning the same lessons their parents had learned about hard work and respect for the land. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, 25 years after they had married, Ambrose and Lila sat together as they had done thousands of times before. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, and they did not need words to communicate anymore. A quarter-century together had taught them to read each other's silences as clearly as their words. You remember that first day? Lila asked finally. When you came to the boarding house to offer me a job. I remember thinking you were pretty, and then feeling guilty for thinking it when I should have been focused on whether you could actually work cattle. She laughed. I was so nervous my hands were shaking. I tried so hard to sound confident, to convince you I could do the work. You did convince me, and then you proved it every single day." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made, giving you a chance. Best thing I ever did was taking that chance. Coming west, taking a job that no other woman would have dared to take, letting myself fall in love with my employer." She turned to look at him, her gray eyes still as clear and direct as they had been 25 years earlier. "I love you, Ambrose Sullivan. I have loved you almost from the beginning, and I will love you until the end. And I love you, Lila Sullivan. My wife, my partner, the strongest person I have ever known." They sat together as the stars came out, just as they had done on countless nights before. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to their hard work and partnership. The house was full of the sounds of family, grandchildren being called in for bed, Arthur and his wife discussing ranch business in the parlor, the comfortable sounds of home. This was what they had built together. Not just a successful ranch, though it was that. Not just a family, though they had been blessed with wonderful children and grandchildren. They had built a partnership based on mutual respect and trust, deepened by love and tested by the challenges of life in a hard land. They had faced droughts and blizzards, market crashes and cattle diseases, the everyday struggles of raising children and running a business. And they had faced it all together, as equals, as partners, as two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Ambrose had hired her for a season, desperate for help and willing to take a chance on an unconventional solution. He had married her before the snow even melted, unable to imagine his future without her in it. And in doing so, he had found not just a wife, but a true soulmate, a woman whose strength matched his own, whose vision for the future aligned perfectly with his. The West had been hard on many people, breaking those who were not strong enough or lucky enough to survive its challenges. But for Ambrose and Lila Sullivan, it had been a place of opportunity, a chance to build something lasting. They had seized that chance with both hands, working together to create a legacy that would endure for generations. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally rose from their chairs and went inside, still holding hands as they had been since that night by the dying fire 25 years earlier. The ranch was quiet now. Everyone settled in for the night. They walked through the house they had expanded and improved over the years, past the photographs on the walls that documented their life together, their children growing up, their grandchildren being born. In their bedroom, the same room where Arthur had been born all those years ago, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. And when they climbed into bed together, Ambrose pulled Lila close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had done for a quarter-century. "Thank you," he said softly into the darkness. "For what? For saying yes. For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me. For everything. Thank you for seeing me when so many others refused to. For giving me a chance to prove myself. For making me your partner in every way that matters." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in a love that had been tested by time and found to be unbreakable. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead and the wind whispered through the grass. The cattle grazed peacefully in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down to their children and grandchildren. But the real legacy of Ambrose and Lila Sullivan was not measured in acres or cattle or dollars. It was measured in the example they set, of partnership and respect, of two people who found strength in each other, and used that strength to build something beautiful and lasting. They had hired each other, really, each bringing skills and strengths that complemented the other. They had married quickly, recognizing in each other the partner they needed for the journey ahead. And they had loved each other deeply and truly for all the years that followed, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from being willing to see past convention to the person underneath, from recognizing a true partner when you find one. As winter came again to Wyoming, the cycle of seasons continuing as it always had, the Sullivan Ranch prepared for the cold months ahead. The cattle were moved to winter pasture, the wood was stacked high, the supplies were laid in. Arthur and his sons handled most of the work now, but Ambrose and Lila still offered advice and guidance, their decades of experience still valuable. On Christmas morning, the whole family gathered at the ranch house for celebration. The house was full of people, 3 generations of Sullivans, plus assorted in-laws and friends who had become family over the years. The noise was tremendous, children laughing and playing, adults talking and catching up, the wonderful chaos of a large family celebration. Ambrose stood in the doorway of the parlor, watching it all with a full heart. Lila came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "This is what we made," she said softly. "All these people, all this love, this is our legacy." "It is a good legacy," he agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible back when I was a scared young man who had just inherited a ranch and had no idea what he was doing. And I was a scared young woman who had lost everything and was desperately hoping for a chance to start over." They stood together, watching their family, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. They had faced the challenges of the West together and emerged stronger for it. They had built a ranch that would last for generations. They had raised children who were capable and good-hearted. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard times, with a constancy that never wavered. As the celebration continued around them, Lila leaned her head on Ambrose's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. They did not need to say anything more. Everything that mattered was right here, in this moment, in this house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured for more than a quarter-century. He had hired her for a season, thinking only of survival. He had married her before the snow even melted, recognizing something precious that he could not let slip away. And in doing so, he had found the great love of his life, a partnership that defined him and sustained him through all the years that followed. It was, Ambrose thought as he held his wife close and watched his grandchildren play, the best story he knew. A simple story, really, about 2 people who took a chance on each other and built something extraordinary from that leap of faith. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down to future generations as an example of what was possible when 2 people truly partnered together, when love was built on respect and trust and equality. The fire crackled in the fireplace, the family laughed and celebrated around them, and outside the snow fell softly on the Wyoming ranch that had become their home. It was, in every way that mattered, a perfect ending. But more than that, it was a testament to a perfect partnership, one that had begun on a cold February morning 25 years earlier, when a desperate rancher had taken a chance on an unconventional solution, and a determined woman had proven that she was exactly what he needed. Together, they had built a life, a family, a legacy. Together, they had faced every challenge and celebrated every joy. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting in the harsh but magnificent landscape of the American West. And together, they would face whatever years remained, secure in a love that had only deepened and strengthened with time, a love that had transformed them both and made them better than they ever could have been alone.